everyone, Hovin here, and welcome back to Hideaway Rambles. Yep, we're up to the first one of 2021, and with a new era of the Marvel Cinematic Universe television on its way in with Wandavision, I figured it would be a timely point to take a look back on the era that has come to a close. Yes, the disparate days of when Marvel's TV shows were all done by different networks and different streaming platforms. It was rather a disjointed one. And now with them basically having everything on Disney Plus in a place that they can control, Disney's pretty much moving on from. The purpose of this ramble is twofold. One, to kind of attempt to explain what the deal with this show is, to kind of recap it briefly. To people who fell off. Basically everyone I know is their experience with this show is either they watched it for a bit but fell off somewhere, or they just haven't bothered because they heard pretty mediocre things about season 1. And then the second half is just gonna be me gushing about my thoughts on season 7.
Hello everyone, I am Hovin's robot assistant, Android Hindsight, and will be assisting him from the future when he doesn't explain something properly.
Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. is a really interesting show for me. I don't think it's one that I could just readily recommend. It's very cheesy and melodramatic, but it's definitely one that I've quite comfortably stuck with, and I do feel like getting some thoughts out about it. The probable difficulties with this is that there will just be things that I might gloss over that won't make sense to someone who hasn't seen the show. Because a lot of this is off the cuff. I will try to explain everything I bring up, but I can make no promises. Okay, so I guess to go into my background with the MCU, I jumped on board the movies. I think I was aware of them as this continuity that was building up to the Avengers from about Iron Man 2. I was one of those jackasses that just kind of stopped after the credits of Iron Man 1. I didn't see the post-credit scene until a later rewatch, well after the fact. And like most of the planet, I've been keeping up with the whole Marvel Cinematic Universe multimedia juggernaut as it's played out. I've been overall very invested in it. And for those who don't know, I used to be a massive completionist. With any given anime franchise, or just general franchise, I tended to like to see every little installment along the way. I'm the studio's wet dream, basically, on that front. I will always see every individual thing, because I'll have some sort of investment. I think the MCU TV shows is what killed my completionism. I don't have it to the same degree that I used to at all. Because I think I tried to watch every single one of these TV shows with the assumption that they were part of the broader plan, and that they would tie into everything, and that, you know, they're not just going to keep greenlighting these for no reason. And then it just eventually, so many of them were subpar and mediocre that I just ended up giving up on most of them. The really big ones were the Netflix series, which started off very strong with Daredevil Season 1 and Jessica Jones Season 1, and then progressively burnt me out with each series, and I think Iron Fist and Defenders just completely killed my interest. I've seen both seasons of Luke Cage, 2 seasons of Jessica Jones, and 2 seasons of Daredevil, but that's about it. I got through the first season of Agent Carter, got a bit of the way through season 2 of that, but then, yeah, stopped because it wasn't that great. I do enjoy Carter and the Howling Commandos a lot, but eh. But all in all, the one TV show that I've managed to stick with over the years has been S.H.I.E.L.D. Which is weird, because as I've said, it's a very cheesy, sort of silly show that oftentimes when it swings big with its moments of drama and emotional turmoil for the characters, it kind of misses. And yet I do just have a distinct fondness for this show, which is funny because one of the big reasons that it's really impossible to recommend is that season 1 is pretty bad, or at the very least quite mediocre. So overall, I'd say if you manage to get past the episodic NCIS but with Marvel movie MacGuffins format of the first 16 episodes of season 1, maybe push further. Like, if you can get into that cheesiness, it does lean into a much more involved serialized format. But It's like 7 seasons at this point. I feel like you'll know early on if the show is your kind of vibe at all. If you like the last arc of season 1, you'll probably like where it goes from there. So yeah, full spoilers from here. Here we go. Let's see if I can recap this bad boy. Season 1. Yeah, like I said, they just kind of... Because this came out, I think it was late 2013, they basically treaded water for 13 episodes with some very generic plot lines of just the team are sent to stop a supernatural, sort of vaguely superhero-based threat. The whole team had a very boring dynamic. Ming-Na Wen is cool, and Clark Gregg does his thing, but they could only hold it up so much. The main characters, Grant Ward, who is a fairly experienced S.H.I.E.L.D. agent, and S.H.I.E.L.D, who's like this advanced super hacker, who's a new recruit to the team, have this sort of will they won't they romance, like mentor-pupil dynamic, and they are so unbelievably boring. I hated them. They were so felt like she was written as so perfect, and I don't know. I found them really insufferable. And then it becomes apparent that the reason they were treading water is that they were basically waiting for the Winter Soldier twist to happen, because around episode 16, a whole faction of S.H.I.E.L.D. turns against them, including some of the recurring characters in the show, and recurring characters from the movies like Agent Sitwell, and they do a whole arc of basically the infighting going on in S.H.I.E.L.D., and it's kinda cool. And Ward, this character I found to be an incredibly boring leading man, turns out to be one of the Hydra guys. So it's like, okay, you've instantly made this way more interesting. And so, yeah, the rest of the S.H.I.E.L.D. involves that. You get a cameo from Samuel L. Jackson in the last episode. This is basically the last time that the outsiders from the movies make cameos in this. With one exception, they bring in Lady Sif as a cameo in this season, and she appears later on, Lady Sif from the Thor movies. She's a lot of fun. She has a really fun dynamic with them, and it makes me really sad that she wasn't utilised more in the Thor movies, but there you go. Season 1 ends with them as an underground S.H.I.E.L.D., and basically from there, you go through various different serialised plots of S.H.I.E.L.D. getting into another crazy scenario, and it's very clear that the show wants to make sure that it's not a raised thing in the movies of why is Coulson still alive, why aren't these S.H.I.E.L.D. agents playing a role in things, of having them either constantly be underground or completely occupied with some huge deal that can't affect the status quo of the movies, but has a huge effect on the status quo of the show. And what's kind of nice is that I feel like this might have been partially because the ratings dropped off across the first 2 seasons. The show just kind of goes hog wild and does whatever out there comic book plotline it wants to do. And I guess I'll get into that. Season 2 involves them, a faction of Hydra. There's a couple of lingering factions of Hydra after the Winter Soldier, who are the villains for various stints of the show, going after this lost city of the Inhumans.
Hovin forgot to mention that the Inhumans are basically like mutants from X-Men, except they're made from this compound entering the atmosphere or something. That Hovin is a dum-dum.
And eventually an Inhuman faction becomes apparent, and it becomes this 3-way conflict, and the leader of the Inhumans turns out to be Sky's mother, and Sky later turns out to be called Daisy, and she is the character from the comics, Daisy Quake Johnson. She becomes an Inhuman, essentially. Grant Ward is also still around as one of the Hydra people. They kidnap him at the start of the season, but eventually, obviously, he breaks out. And yeah, they bring in Kyle MacLachlan to play Daisy's crazy Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde dad. I don't remember exactly what his deal was, but him and her mom, Jia Ying, the Inhuman leader, have a weird sort of screwed up dynamic. I believe the season ends with them dying. Yeah, and the faction of Hydra they were going up against falling, but Grant does escape. Oh yeah, also this thing called Terragenesis happens, where this mineral, this compound is disposed into the atmosphere, turning a bunch of people into Inhumans. And all of these things at the time felt like a huge universe-shaking deal, but it's weird. Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. is very good at making you think it's massively shaking up its status quo, of the status quo of the MCU, when it's actually really only shaking up the status quo of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. It's all feels massive, but is very self-contained. which might seem like a cheap trick, but it's a cheap trick that is quite good at pulling off. I think the key strengths of the show are its effective facade of these stakes, and also the way it's constantly tying in these older plot points into later seasons. There's a one-off villain in season 1 who's using this element called gravitonium to pull things. It's what it sounds like. It's a mega gravity element that pulls things in, and it creates a big catastrophe. There's like a stinger of him like still being alive inside it at the end. You think, oh, okay, this gravitonium isn't going to go anywhere. They bring it back in like season 5, although the scientist himself, he got swallowed by it basically, doesn't really play a role. It's just that the gravitonium gets brought back. But it's still cool that they fold it back in, and they do this in all sorts of ways, and I'm always very impressed with the ways they maintain that continuity, I guess. To go into season 3, Grant Ward has his own faction of Hydra, and also this character called Malik, who is actually one of the shadowy people on the Council of Big Government from the first Avengers movie, and I believe he also might appear in the Winter Soldier as well as one of them. He is a leader of a Hydra faction, Gideon Malik. Him and Ward and S.H.I.E.L.D. It's another three-way pincer conflict. It's basically Malik's faction are trying to open up a gateway to another planet where the ancient Inhuman sort of originator, like the originator of the Inhumans, called Hive. He's this weird alien creature, has been banished. There's this whole arc where one of the scientist character, Simmons, gets warped to another planet, and there's a whole episode of just her slowly discovering what this planet is, and it's one of the series' stronger episodes. And there's a big soap opera because, okay, her and the other scientist characters, Fitz, this short Scottish lad, have this constant will they, won't they, of, like, he has these unrequited feelings, and she doesn't know how she feels about them, and the series is just constantly drawing out this soap opera about will they, won't they, until, like, literally the entire stakes of the show kind of hinges on it by the end. It's so ridiculous and really silly. I was kind of rooting for them to a point, but after a point I was like, come on. But in its own way, it is quite funny and charming, I guess. Basically, Hive comes through this portal, and the remainder of the season, there's a point where it vaguely ties into Civil War. Yeah, the movie tie-ins become more tenuous after the Winter Soldier one. The second season has one instant where they call in the Avengers to deal with the beginning of Age of Ultron, but, like, you know, that's it. It's just an end of episode stinger that never gets touched on again. And then this season has a bit where Hive causes some of the teammates to, like, he basically mind controls them, so it's kind of mirroring the Civil War stuff, because that's what it was coinciding with. But yeah, it's pretty straightforward from then on. A few characters from the previous seasons die, a few don't. Hive gets launched into space. Oh, also, important to note, Hive takes control of Grant Ward's body, so he is dead now. He's gone.
By take control of his body, Hovin does not mean mind control like the other teammates, as in Hive literally takes Ward's body as his own.
This is maybe one of the more climactic season finales, but yeah. Season 4 is probably my favourite. This is S.H.I.E.L.D. at its most goofy and batshit and just, like, doing whatever the hell it wants. The season starts with Ghost Rider, Robbie Reyes, I believe he is the Latino Ghost Rider. There's a whole plotline of him looking for this book called The Darkhold, which is being guarded by these ghosts, which then leads into this plotline about this Scottish scientist that helped them in season 3.
Note, not the same Scottish scientist as Fitz. This is an entirely separate Scottish scientist, but both he and Fitz become obsessed with an evil robot waifu he built.
He has created this life model decoy called Ada, this, like, android woman. I think she goes completely batshit from the Darkhold. Then the second half of the season involves her trapping all of the agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. in basically the Matrix, except it's an alternate universe where Hydra has won, and most of them are brainwashed except for a couple of them, and the two that aren't brainwashed have to go and find all the ones that are and snap them out of it and make them remember who they are. Phil Coulson is a school teacher. Daisy is a S.H.I.E.L.D. agent with Grant Ward, and this is a timeline where he didn't turn Hydra, so he's good in this. It's keeping up that shit baiting with Grant Ward even after he is dead. This is a big one. Fitz, you know, the cute, adorable scientist who has the soap opera with his science bud. Yeah, he is the director of Hydra in this universe. It's a big deal, and him remembering this once they get snapped out takes a major toll on his character, and it's definitely something he carries a lot of guilt with going forward. Eventually they break out. I think Ghost Rider comes back in to help them again, but I'm not sure. This is one of the cleanest finales. It's like they all go to a bar, and then there is a big stinger cliffhanger at the end of like suddenly they get kidnapped from this bar by this bald man, but that's kind of it. I guess you could say that the life model decoy thing kind of ties into the movies because it's like Vision, but the circumstances that it's made under are just totally different, so yeah, it's kind of tenuous. I guess you could also say the Darkhold stuff sort of ties in with Doctor Strange, but again, it's just vague mystical thing, doesn't really tie into the movies much at all. Then you have season 5. This one starts the ticking clock of basically, so they explained how Coulson got revived, because that's a huge thing. The way Coulson got revived, I believe it was explained in, I think it was season 1, is that he was involved in this thing called the Tahiti Project, where he was injected with Kree blood. And in this season, it finally catches up with him, and at the end of this season, it's sort of left up in the air whether he survives. It's implied that he's going to die. But to start off with, this season has them seemingly, they wake up in space. They think they're in space, and it's a spaceship sci-fi based one, but it actually turns out to be a shattered version of Earth in the far future where Quake, or Daisy, has used her tremor in human powers to basically split apart the Earth. Like, she's gone completely off the deep end. The only survivors of Earth are this colony in this place called the Lighthouse, which is this former S.H.I.E.L.D. settlement on Earth, which can withstand basically anything. And this lighthouse has basically become, like, part of a space colony for some Kree. I believe the Kree are vaguely related to some Kree we've seen in the series. I don't remember the main Kree bad guy of this. This season is probably one of the weaker ones, besides season 1. It's like a lot of the times where they try and emphasize the post-apocalyptic nature of things, and they feature like flashbacks to this timeline where characters from the main series are trying to act all forlorn about how hopeless everything is, and it just doesn't quite land because the cheesy acting just doesn't pull it off, but it's still fun in its own right. It's cool to see them time jump around. They get a new character on board called Deke, who turns out to be the future grandson of Fitzsimmons in this time. That's their ship name, by the way. It's literally their ship name is what they are referred to in the series. That's how on the nose it is about them. Eventually they go back to the present, but this general who's been on their case all the time, he's called General Talbot, he gets injected with gravitonium to get them out of a pinch, and he basically becomes like this superhero, but he gets like a huge god complex about it and goes evil. And there's also some aliens on hand who are there to anticipate Thanos. This is the tie into Infinity War, aside from all the space stuff. There are some aliens on hand who I think are anticipating Thanos' arrival. I don't remember who they were. There's a lot I've not explained. Like, okay, the bald guy who kidnapped them, he was actually using them to try and prevent this future, and he was a Chronicom, which is a race of beings that they're like androids. Yeah, they're the sort of mechanical beings who can see time in a non-linear way. They're able to tap into this thing called the time stream, and they become very important going forward. This bald man is called Enoch, and he is a big major character going forward from here. They fight Talbot. It's quite amusing. It's quite charming. It's like this big sort of Avengers level fight where he's like using his power to zip between buildings, but it's with television network ABC cheesy special effects. There's also this really shite plot line about, I think it's the son of the leader of the Hydra faction from season 2 that isn't Ward, and the daughter of this like woman who's also a defector, and they form an alliance. They're really, both of the actors are really bad, especially the daughter, and she's meant to be a super assassin. I don't remember where it goes. They're kind of strung along as side characters for a couple of seasons, at least the son is. I think the daughter dies in this season, and the season ends with Fitz. He gets crushed and is basically, I think he's killed, but they figure out a way to reach his frozen body because he was separated from the others in season 4 and put in stasis by Enoch, so there is still a living version of him up there in space because they are now in a different timeline, I think is the logic. It's the same kind of bullshit time travel physics that Endgame uses. I just fucking go with it because I don't care about nitpicking time travel plot lines unless it's just deliberately annoys me. It really gets under my skin in some way. Season 6, I barely remember. It mainly serves as setup for Season 7, ultimately. It's like some beings from another universe. And, okay, this is when they start at the point where they have to start writing excuses for Clark Gregg to be on the show.
Note, O.G. Coulson dies from his Kree blood at the end of Season 5.
So, Clark Gregg plays evil Coulson, who is basically not Coulson at all. He's just a being from a parallel dimension that has taken Coulson's form for reasons I don't remember. And he is the bad guy for this season. I believe it results in a bunch of characters being injured from being exposed to this world. There's also the much more fun plotline about Fitz and Enoch on the run through space while Skye and Simmons and a few other S.H.I.E.L.D. agents are on a star-hopping mission to catch him. It's a lot of fun. I always like when they go into space or do crazy stuff like that. But yeah, the main plotline with the parallel universe thing is a bit weak sauce. And then the ultimate setup for it leads into Season 7, where Chronicoms come back and are after Fitz.
Hovin had to take a break here to try and recall what the hell the Chronicoms plan actually was. Season 6 is kind of a blur.
Okay, I've been staring at the Wikipedia page for some time, trying to work out why the Chronicoms wanted Fitz again. And I believe they wanted him to construct another homeworld because the villain of Season 6, one of the parallel universe, or it might have just been a portal from another world, it might not have been a parallel universe, but the villain of that season had destroyed the Chronicom homeworld. But yeah, they basically, either they wanted him dead, or at some point they just wanted him to, like, work for them for the rest of his life. Which Simmons did not want, because at this point they have actually married at this point. They are a thing. And I guess, yeah, this takes us to Season 7, where the crew have been brought back to, I believe it's like Prohibition era to start with. Yeah, it's like the Great Depression era New York. And Simmons seems to have some kind of, like, mental memory block on where Fitz is. And they basically just have to use the now time machine equipped Zephyr to time jump ahead and try and get back to their own time and figure out where Fitz is. All the while, the Chronicoms are sending hunters of theirs back in time to try and stop them, to try and find out where Fitz is. What Season 7 essentially is, again, it is tying into Endgame in this way, in that it is a full-on time travel season of them going through the decades. And they even did bring in the quantum realm into it later on. Oh yeah, this is one thing that really confuses me about, I guess I'll go with Season 5. The show was basically somewhat hampered by the network. For one thing, with Season 5, they were completely unsure if they were going to get more of the show, which is why we had the ambiguous ending of Coulson's probably going to die here, and they're going to go look for Fitz, but it's very much framed as an ending of sorts. And then Season 6, despite they at one point in the season literally mention what year it is, which was the stupidest thing to do, they're unable to reference the blip, just because they didn't know if the season was going to air before or after Infinity War. It's very awkward, and it's like, it bugs me to no end. It's like, if they just hadn't had that one character, I believe it was Deke, reference the fact that it was, I think, I don't know, 2019 at one point, like, it wouldn't have been a problem. But they do, and it just makes you very like, nope, this would have been brought up. Why couldn't you have coordinated with the network to make this work? But I guess that's why they're managing all their own series on Disney Plus now. One of the many reasons. But yeah, this season just has a lot of very, very nice little things. Like the first one, they have like each of the opening titles for this season, as they're time hopping, has a different gimmick. The 30s one has kind of a noir look to it. The 50s one has more of a retro sci-fi movie kind of vibe, like they came from another world. The 70s, they have like a cheesy TV show intro in the style of that. I think that's a big thing about this show. For all its hokiness and cheesiness, you can tell that the creative team and the showrunners and the writers have a lot of fun with it. And I feel like that passion is really palpable in the show, with all of these little fun things they throw in with it. They go through the origins of Hydra.
By origins of Hydra, Hovin means their origins within S.H.I.E.L.D. over the 20th century, not their founding. Although now that I think about it, I think Season 3 goes into how one sect of Hydra have basically been around since ancient times to try and revive Hive, that founding Inhuman who was the villain of that season.
Like, we meet a young Gideon Malik, and his brother Nathaniel Malik becomes one of the recurring bad guys of the season, as he becomes embroiled with the early forms of Xia Ying's Inhumans faction. She has this sanctuary away and he invades it. There's one where they're in the 30s, there's one where in the 50s, and of course it has a lot of Cold War paranoia. They have to like stop a bomb from going off. The segment in the 70s, and a lot of it happens in the 80s actually, because the jumps continue to get shorter and shorter. There's a surprisingly gory episode where this, like, I believe it's the Chronicoms create this like very 1980s sort of robot. It almost looks like it's made out of the toy Meccano, the construction toy, that goes on a killing spree around the S.H.I.E.L.D. base. It's a very, like, makeshift S.H.I.E.L.D. base, but yeah. This season had the voice of Mulan flirting with the voice of Kronk, because you have Ming-Na Wen as Agent Melinda May, and one of the higher-ups that they run into on the timelines is Patrick Warburton. Sometimes this show demands a lot of dramatic weight for stuff you might not be invested in. There's a huge deal where Mac is really worried about his parents being held hostage, and they die, and it's a big gut punch for him, and I think they get taken over by Chronicoms, or replaced with Chronicoms, and it's like there's a whole episode of him just like burning out and being stuck in a period in the 80s with Zeke, and he's just burnt out and he has to eventually get his groove back, and it's like, I didn't even remember he had a thing with his parents. I will say that with each season, I did not keep up with this show very closely after season 3. With each season, it became a thing that I caught up with in bulk further and further after each given season ended. Like, I literally just caught up with season 7 now because Wandavision is on the cusp of coming out as the time of recording, and I wanted to finish it before that happened because my brain is weird like that. I like to watch through these things in a clean-cut way. It makes the dopamine happy, I guess. I don't know. Maybe it's dopamine. Who knows? God, I'm talking complete bollocks now.
Ganbate, Hovin, Android Hindsight believes in you.
Oh yeah. God, I mentioned how the show kept writing ways for Clark Gregg to be on the show after his death. So in this season, they have an LMD of him, a life model decoy, like with Ada. He's a cyborg in this season, but he doesn't deactivate at the end. It's left very ambiguous. He's like, I'm gonna see the world for a bit and then decide I want to deactivate. A lot of attention in this season is drawn to how much their various trials and tribulations have changed the cast, and that's very strong with Coulson in this season. Like, he has the consciousness of and the memories of his former self, but he's died like twice, and it's quite traumatic for him. There's a time loop episode where he gives like this big impassioned like speech about it, and it's quite hard hitting. The time loop episode is a very fun one. Basically, the Zephyr, their Quinjet, which they have refashioned into a time machine, their time jumps aren't calculated. They are very at the mercy of whenever the time storm, their little thing, has a flare-up, and there is a timer, and with each decade they're in, it gets a little shorter, and at this point it is getting so quick that they are close to this thing called the time storm, that they are on a time loop, and that time loop gets smaller and smaller. And it's a fun episode of them, like, trying to figure out a way to get out of this time loop, and it ultimately leads to some implications about how Simmons, her memories of what happened to Fitz, are suppressed. Enoch is a really great side character across these series, and he meets his untimely death in this episode. He is the Chronicon, the bald one I mentioned earlier. Super charming character, has a very, like, Spock from Star Trek-esque quality of hit to him, of just being very logical and emotion devoid, and quite amusing in that sense. Yeah, I really felt connected to him by the end. He is easily one of the best characters introduced in the latter seasons of this show. Another thing, they fold over a character from Agent Carter, because Agent Carter was cancelled. It was probably the first Marvel thing to meet an end due to low ratings, and a side character from that, Detective Sousa, who's the police detective. I think he's a detective, I'm not sure. He's a military vet from the Second World War who worked alongside Carter in that season. I think she might have been his love interest, I'm not sure. It's been a while since I watched any of it, but he is folded into this. They meet him in the 50s, and he joins the team, and he time travels with them. because he was meant to die at this point, and they make it so that they kind of falsify his death so it still happens, but he can join them on adventures. So one character they introduce is Cora, who is Daisy's older sister who died, and her dying is one of the things that sets her mum Jia Ying off on such a huge rage and causes her Inhumans faction to become so militant. They run into her, and Nathaniel Malik, the younger brother of Gideon Malik, basically takes him under her wing, and he is not really interested in Hydra stuff. He just wants to become a dictator and rule the world, which he claims is he just wants to create anarchy, but that's just what he says to get people on his side. There's a Freudian slip at one point, because he's working with the Chronicoms, where he mentions, like, oh, I just want to rule. I mean, get rid of the establishment. Yeah, he's a complete little shit, and you just want to see him get his teeth kicked in. Cora feels very flimsy as a character in this season, because she flip-flops between being on Nathaniel's side and on Daisy's side in a way that just doesn't feel like she's well established. She's meant to be kind of a huge, crucial part of all this, and her face turning is a big deal in them getting their plans sorted, but I don't know. Her constant heel and face turns and how seriously the show takes them were quite hard for me to take seriously, I guess. The Chronicoms, how they were utilized as these creatures that could see the flow of time, they work very well for me as antagonists, because they have this kind of cheesy form of fatalism. I use the word cheesy a lot. It's apt for this series. About the end of the series on its way. And there's all of this stuff about, oh, the whole team won't get out of this together. And there's loads of this foreshadowing. It's like, in the end, it's like, it's kind of true. Kind of. All it really means is that one of them has to stay behind, but we'll get to that. Basically, yeah, the ultimate plan is they eventually manage to find Fitz. Through all these assembled parts that Enoch has planted throughout history on their travels, and they create a portal which sends through Fitz from another timeline. As it turns out, they have been sent back to a branching timeline of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and basically the whole plan from the get-go was to have Fitz take them back through to the main timeline and have the Chronicoms completely lose them. But of course, the agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. are like, the people of this timeline still need to be saved. The Chronicoms are about to wipe out the Earth, because at this point the Chronicoms have wiped out most of S.H.I.E.L.D. on this planet. There's like a few scant survivors that are banded together where they are. And so what they actually end up doing is essentially pulling the Chronicoms with them back to their timeline where they got taken away from in the first place. It's a very cool little plan of, like, them just having all of these little pieces just right and inserting themselves back to where they were, setting things up so that their past selves can go back into the timeline, tricking the Chronicoms into thinking that their ship, the Zephyr, is on Earth where it was, so that they shoot at it and destroy the temple where the bad guys from Season 6 were. It's very satisfying, and then at the end of it, you just get a big blowout action sequence of them just decking the Chronicoms on their ship. There's a weird plot point where, like, Cora, and this is the big deal of a face turn, gives all the Chronicoms on Earth empathy, and they decide they want to be friends, and I find that a bit weird. Like, why would they do that? I don't know. Maybe it's something that's unexplained. Shrug. I do have to say, I like the way that, like, using this timeline jumping as a way to defeat this sort of omniscient time-seeing foe, it's really neat in its own way that probably doesn't make any sense, but I like it. And, like, probability and percentages, which are used as this, like, very hard and fast thing when they're in their own timeline, are kind of used by DBZ power levels. Like, the leader of them has this probability means nothing with this lot in the last episode. It's very funny. I love that without their actual time stream of their own timeline, the Chromicons are complete morons that totally fall from a bluff. I think it's like Coulson convinces them to attack the lighthouse, which actually completely plays into their plan, or something like that, yeah. Fitz and Simmons, it turns out, have had a kid in their time separated from the rest, because they were separated from the rest of the cast for a while in Season 6. They were basically put in, like, a chamber where no time passed, so they had all the time in the world, and they had a kid. Oh lord, the child actor playing this kid is not very good. And I guess another thing that slightly disappointed me with this episode but I guess there wasn't really much room for it in the plot, is there was no crossover of various side characters over the course of the series. It would have been kind of cool if they'd all come back for one last hurrah. I get that, like, Samuel L. Jackson is difficult because this show just did not get enough ratings to justify paying up money for, like, a movie star cameo, but, like, let's see, like, in season 1, there's a side character who later turns out to be the cyborg character from the comics Deathlock, who fades in and out. I don't think he got killed off, so it's a shame they didn't bring him back later on. There were these two agents who I think they're vaguely assassins, who were exes that kind of got back together. I think they're called Hunter and Morse. There was a whole deal in, like, I think it was season 2, where they had to leave the team because they got caught up in this scandal that had the government after them, and they had, like, this big sad farewell, a spy's goodbye, where, like, all of the main agents raised a glass to them in a bar to say farewell. If any readers of One Piece, it was basically like the scene where the Straw Hats stick the crosses in the air. You know the one. They were meant to have their own spin-off, but then this spin-off got cancelled, and they never got brought back into the show. And it's like, okay, why not? At this point, who the fuck cares what government is after them? This version of Earth has had so much stuff going on with it. I feel like they could easily write in a way for them to come back, but I guess they couldn't get the actors back on board. I don't know. But yeah. The series ends on a note that I've heard described as kind of bittersweet, which I guess is, but it's still largely happy. Like, all of the agents of S.H.I.E.L.D, besides Deke, who had to stay behind in the other universe to send them through the other timeline, they're living fairly happy. They're getting on with their given vocation, and they plan to have regular reunions. It shows them 1 year later, and they plan to do it again. They all meet via hologram, but then they're also just really busy with their lives, and they can't, like, one thing that it kind of builds up early on is that they are a found family, and I guess it's kind of this issue of found family versus biological, which I know is one subject of the Marvel movies that I saw a very interesting critique of in an article where it described how in Avengers Endgame, a lot of the revelations of it are very much characters choosing their own biological family over the found family of the Avengers, which they found disappointing. And that's definitely something about this season. It's like they have this whole idea that they are a family, and then they've all split off with their own couples. It's like, you'd imagine after all that they've been through that they'd, like, I don't know, share an apartment together or something? Like, but I also kind of get it. These are very driven people, and it's like, different members of them will move on with life in different ways. It's like, Mac goes back in with being a S.H.I.E.L.D. operative. I don't know if he's still the director, but you see him on a helicarrier.
Note, from the end of Season 1, Coulson takes up the role of S.H.I.E.L.D's director from Nick Fury, and then after he dies at the end of Season 5, Mac, one of the S.H.I.E.L.D. agents I've just realized Hovin hasn't properly introduced, takes up the role from then on. It's unclear what role Nick Fury holds during Age of Ultron and Spider-Man: Far From Home, but I guess it doesn't really matter. His story role is basically the same.
May goes into teaching at one of the S.H.I.E.L.D. colleges, like one of the academies or something. Skye settles down, well, not Skye, I haven't called her Skye in ages. The show hasn't called her Skye in ages. I don't know why I'm still calling her that. Yeah, Daisy settles down with Sousa. They become a thing. Basically, everyone goes their separate ways, and Coulson journeys the world as an android and never meets any of the Avengers cast again, assumably. It's like, I'm not entirely sure about them all separating, but I'm also like, it's not unrealistic, so fine. It's a happier ending than the season seemed to be building up for them at the very least. So that's it. A show that I've been following for 7 years has finally come to a close. If you are a newcomer, please let me know how much sense I managed to make of this in the comments. I feel like this was a complete incoherent rambling mess to any of the uninitiated. If you like what you've seen here, and you want to see more, considering following along with my podcast, Hovin's Hideaway. We mainly talk about manga, but occasionally I might try and branch out into other stuff. Check out my podcast, Duckface Diaries, where myself and manga YouTuber, Wensleydale Cheddar, read through the World Trigger manga volume by volume. We are coming up on our 9th volume recap this coming month. It's the climax of one of the series' biggest arcs. For those who don't know, it's a very tactical battle shonen. It's an action sci-fi manga. It's very worth checking out. Go for our introduction to World Trigger episode if you're not familiar with the series, where I explain a bit about it. And if you're up for it, come and read along.
Hovin the absolute silly sausage forgot to mention his video essay called World Trigger, a love letter to underdogs, which breaks down why the series is worth reading for the uninitiated. Silly Hovin, you took like 2 months editing that thing and you're not even going to plug it? I guess that's why I'm here.
And apart from that, yeah, that's been me. This is Hovin with an H, signing out.
And this has been Android Hindsight, reminding everyone that Hanbakawa is best waifu. Let's hope Hovin doesn't make me a recurring character. Sayonara, gamers.